Michael Kitces, what are you doing here?
Well, I was just like hanging out in this Zoom room, seeing if anybody would like stroll through to chat, and you showed up. So I was like, cool. I
Let's
could
have a
just chat in this like random impromptu conversation.
exactly. Exactly. It'd be like a little random, spontaneous meeting, serendipitous meeting at a coffee shop. And you know what because as we do, like we're not going to talk about the weather or how are the Lakers going to make the playoffs or what we're going to talk. And by the time you listen to this, it will already be obvious. We know this was recorded before we knew whether the Lakers were, well, actually they just made the playoffs last night. But we're not going to talk about basketball. We're going to talk about the siren song of investment performance, because that's what we do.
That is what, well, actually, ironically, that's usually not what I do because I hate talking about performance, but that's probably actually part of the point of the conversation today. Like, I like talking about financial planning, Carl, not like that investment performance-y stuff, because I can't really guarantee that, and I don't control the market, so I sort of try to downplay that part of the conversation and value proposition.
That's like it was so dismissive and so like so beneath us.
You want investment results, like
speak of such things.
You get what you get and you don't get upset.
Like, exactly. Go talk to a stockbroker if you want to watch investment results, if you want investment results. Yeah, and that's exactly what I want to talk about, because I get these. This is a regular occurrence, and I want to be really, really clear. The like amazing professionals that listen to this podcast are going to have a tendency to be dismissive about this entire conversation. And because it's like, my clients don't do that. Well, they do. Like, let's just be a little more humble. I'm speaking to myself here. Like, I think this is a bigger challenge. And it's particularly a challenge for those of us who know that it doesn't matter. Like the wisdom you've gained about not wanting to talk about investment performance makes this a big challenge, because I don't know if you've noticed, but everybody else is talking about it, right? Like, culturally, you can't get away from it. And so the Financial Pornography Network, there's probably 2 or 3 of them now, but the original one is still all day, every day, right? Every newspaper, the radio on the way home from work, your friends, your neighbors, the stroll through the financial planning there is no financial planning section, by the way, at Barnes & Noble, if there's even a Barnes & Noble anymore. It's more like financial advice, personal finance, investments. Guess what's the big section? The investment section. So that's exactly what I want to talk about. Is the question I get often is, hey, I just lost a client to somebody who was pitching better investment performance. Like, there's a million versions of this. Like, the one I just got the other day was somebody said, I just lost a client to a stock, like literally to a stockbroker, which I was like, well, do they still exist? I lost one to a stockbroker because they were claiming investment performance. And I don't talk about that much, but the question, this is an email, said, I know my investment performance is better, certainly over any period of time that matters. I know my performance will be better because my process is better. Mm-hmm. And this is how I used to feel. So this is a long intro, but let me just set this up with a story. So I had this client, his name was, we'll just call him Dr. Terry. And Dr. Terry was, he was a radiologist. That's not his name, by the way, Dr. Terry. Dr. Terry was a radiologist, and he loved to mountain bike a lot. So that's how we got in touch. And like, when I first asked him, like, how often would you, in an ideal world, how often would you hear from me? He said, in an ideal world, I'd never hear from you, but I'd only really hear from you when I need to hear from you. So like, Terry, he was really like, all the signs, everything he said was like, I don't care. I'm not going to be distracted. And so I gave him what he wanted. Like, I didn't talk to him all that often. And I got transfer paperwork once, like in the old days, ACAT paperwork,
Mm-hmm.
And is that still a thing?
Yeah, it's a little more electronic now, but yes.
This thing arrived in the mail. I had to open it. And it was going out to a very focused investment place, which we won't talk about, but you could fly. Anyway, so we won't talk about who the investment place is. I'm going to catch a, and then with an on the end. And I called Dr. Terry. I'm like, you can't, what are you doing? You can't do this. Like, I'm not going to let you do this. He lived 2 or 3 hours away. So I was like, look, is this a local problem? Because I can help you find somebody local, but you're not going there. Why are you going there? It's like, well, because they have this big thing and they invest and they send lots of letters in the mail that are really big and they talk about their investment performance and you don't ever talk about that. And I was like, and I think it was specifically like they have more exposure to Asia right now, something like that. And Dr. Terry didn't even know what that meant. He had just read that. And I was like, you've got exposure to, like, what do you think? And I ended up saving that relationship because I just told him, I'm like, Terry, I'm sorry, you can't, I won't let you move. And he was like, can you do that? And I said, no, I can't, but I'm not going to let you and your wife move because I know that will be a bad decision. But my point here is, he was like, Carl, you never told me that, I don't even know about the investment process. And I was like, well, but you told me in the first meeting.
Didn't want to.
You didn't want to. And he was like, yeah, but we're not there yet. And I was like, oh, I kind of, and I don't know that you ever.
From the client who said you were there.
Yeah, exactly. This is when I decided to never believe people if they say they don't care about investment performance, to never believe them, because they actually probably are telling the truth that they don't care, but the whole world cares. And you can't get out of that. Yeah. And so I used to feel like I could go toe to toe, because I came from the investment background. I could go toe to toe with anybody on how we invested money. There was no, like, institutionally, I don't care where you put me. I was like, I can go toe to toe with anybody. And the downside was, I know that it doesn't matter. Like, you can build the best performing portfolio on the planet if you don't behave well. And then if you even behave well, if it's not aligned with your values, you've climbed, you've spent your whole life climbing a ladder to find out it was against the wrong wall, to paraphrase Covey. So that's when I was always like, that doesn't even matter. It doesn't even matter. And I would come across as dismissive. And then I realized, like, that's not the tone is more like, that matters a ton. It's a huge driver in your success of meeting these goals. It's one of the major drivers. And it doesn't matter. And it doesn't matter at all if we don't get this other stuff right. So what I wanted to talk about today with that long-winded introduction is, like, how do we handle those of us who are living more enlightened lives that we know, oh, that little thing, investing, cute, that you care about that. We've also got to understand that it actually not only is it important, I think we can all agree it's important, it's everywhere. So with that, I'm just going to drop that in your lap. What do you think?
I mean, to me, this like, there's sort of two different threads that come to mind here. I mean, one is just literally, like, how should we navigate that conversation if the reality is, like, no, you really do need to bring the investment part up from time to time, no matter how much you're otherwise focusing on super cool, awesome, really valuable financial planning. If a part of what you're doing is managing the money, and particularly if the bulk of what you're billing is managing the money, like, at some point you do still have to show up to that conversation. So I think, hey, just there's some acknowledgement to that, and I don't know, maybe you have some words or language or suggestions about how best to have that conversation. I guess so. There's three things in my mind. Like, one is just, like, having that conversation. The second, I think, is asking the question, like, is the truth this just wasn't a good fit client? Like, is the reality you do investment management plus financial planning, you do financial planning on an AUM model. They gave you the AUM, they humored your financial planning thing, and it wasn't actually what they valued. It wasn't actually what they cared about. They chased investment shiny objects, and you were an investment shiny object, and now someone else is an investment shiny object, and off they go. I don't want to go too quickly to the, well, then clearly they're not the right fit because they're just performance chasing. I do think we actually have to own a little bit. Like, did we have the right conversations? Did we set the right expectations? Did we continue to re-anchor the expectations so that when they had a good year or two, they didn't then expect to get that every year because we didn't keep having the conversation? You realize there's going to be a future year that's terrible and not like the past two that we had. Like, if you're not continuously saying that. So I do think there is some onus on us. But to be fair, I do think there can be a point where you either recognize maybe this really just was a performance chasing client. So on the one hand, that means maybe they just really weren't a good fit. On the other hand, then my question is like, well, what is your marketing and sales process that this person ended out a client in the first place? Because you did all that financial planning work and they fired you as performance chasing a year or two later. So you probably lost money on this relationship. Should you have changed something in your sales and marketing process to not bring them in the first place? But the third piece of this, I mean, granted, if like the moment of this discovery is literally like they have fired you and the money just ACAT'd out to the new stockbroker, like it may be a little bit too late to win it back. But sometimes at least we get some shot at this conversation, right? The client calls and says like, I'm really not happy with my investment performance. I think I'm leaving. And you're like, we beat the bench. I mean, we lost money last year, but like we beat the benchmark last year. Like, why are you leaving? Because someone else said they can get me 14%. It's really low risk. And I'm like, all right, let's slow down a moment. When we get a crack of those conversations, the part that I will own, like I wasn't good at this when I still sat in more of these conversations. Like my gut impulse was always like, some version of let me tell you why what you're being pitched is either like total BS or completely overpromised or right, just like fighting gloves are on. Let me like obliterate this opposing investment pitch that's coming at you. And when I actually look at back at like some scenarios where clients were lost over these conversations, what I remember were things like Eric at the end of the day fired us because it was shortly after Christmas and his brother-in-law was mouthing off about all the amazing returns that he got at the family holiday party. And the whole thing was basically just he felt insecure in front of his brother-in-law because we didn't make him as much money as his brother-in-law. Like it had nothing to do with investment performance. It had nothing actually to do with us and our relationship. It was a freaking family dynamics thing of like a chip on his shoulder that Eric had about his brother-in-law that ended up manifesting as my brother-in-law apparently is making better returns than I am. And so I have to do something to change that because I can't let my brother-in-law one-up me. Like that was the actual issue, in which case debating the shiny investment pitch that was going at him was not in any way, shape, or form going to solve it, because as long as he felt inadequate to his brother-in-law, like if it wasn't that, it was going to be something else. Because like that, I was solving the wrong problem. Like the question was, what was the social dynamic that was making them want to chase the investment returns? Like I remember another one, like Ted, we lost at the end of the day because the kids want like the kids wanted to get a trip to Disneyland and do like the fancy Disneyland trip, and they realized they couldn't afford it. And so the way that Ted wanted to make that up was, well, I'm feeling like a bad father. Like this is my paraphrasing in retrospect, but like I feel like I'm a bad father because I can't do the Disneyland trip that my wife and my kids want to do. And so we must need to find a financial advisor who can get us better investment returns so that we can do it.
Wow.
Yeah. Right. It's like, I mean, it was ultimately like I'm having these family dynamics issues.
Right.
Because I'm having these conversations about what we can afford and not afford with my family. That was not really a conversation I was ready to have with my kids. So I need a place to vent that. And the place I'm venting that is you're not getting me good enough investment returns. So I'm going to go find another financial advisor. And just, I feel like it has to be acknowledged. Like, yes, sometimes just it's really about the money and the performance returns, but sometimes it's not.
Yeah.
And I think at least recognizing or taking a moment to say like, hey, just, is there something that's driving this conversation? Like what's particularly if it's a client that hasn't necessarily been pushing the investment conversation all along, and just suddenly have the clear blue sky is like, you're not giving good enough investment returns, I'm shopping for another advisor. Like, what prompted this? Before you go to war on like, and the other thing is complete BS. But like, before we get there, and I'm gloves on to tear that down. Like, where did this conversation come from? Like, what sparked this for you?
Yeah, I love that. And I love especially how you went into your nice, empathetic Kitsis voice when where did this come from? What sparked it? Like, you went right into that empathetic voice away from the fighting
with
voice.
hindsight.
Did you notice?
Yes. In the moment, I'm like, gloves on. Let me demolish this.
Yeah, but I didn't know you had a
pitch that I know is BS. Like, I'm alone. I can only say this with retrospect. Like, I can only say this looking back. I was like, I didn't navigate this well at the time. Like, it's that, I mean, I think for us advisors, like, it's that fight or flight mode thing that kicks in, like clients transferring out, or like they're telling you that you're getting fired. Like, I have to fight, I have to defend, like the gloves are on. I'm ready to come out swinging to defend this business or win this business back. And so, if you're obviously not swinging at the clients, like, if I'm coming out swinging, I'm swinging at the broker that they're going to, like, I'm swinging at this investment pitch that I don't think is a legit pitch. And like the client got lost.
Yeah, no, for sure. And let's just break those down real quick. So number one, like, how do we drop in hints often enough so people know we're paying attention? That was my biggest problem, was like this swing to behavioral finance, and now even deeper, sort of this idea of values and meaning and purpose. Sometimes we forget it's like the investment performance is incredibly important, but it's table stakes in our minds. We're like, of course, that's just check, that's done. But the clients don't know that. And so I think that's where
you've got their life savings. It is high, like, let's be honest, it is higher stakes than that for them.
Yeah, completely. And they're hearing that it's super high stakes from everybody else. So it's fair. Like, this isn't, I don't think this is important to them, and they think this is the number one job. And so, how do you drop in? And I love the idea of just systematically, whether it's once a month. This is kind of where I'm hesitant to mention it because everybody's going to email and ask for it. But the 17-point wealth management audit, which I don't know if it was 17 points, make up your own points, but a bunch of them were investment related. Did we rebalance? Did we check what the managers were doing? Is anything broken there? Like, there was things that we did on a routine basis to make sure that the investments that we were on top of it. We weren't surprised. This wasn't trading in any way. It was just, and so we did that every single month. Well, the client should know that. So just find a professional way to make sure they know that you're doing that work. Like, if you attend a conference call, if you go to a conference, a dimensional conference to learn about, like, make sure they know that you're still doing that. Like, you're aware that, something crazy is going on in Asia. Well, that's not a great example, but just make sure they're aware. That was number one.
Yeah. I'll give a shout out even for, Matthew Majarvis, Micah Shalansky over at Perfect RIA, that just, they frame this as the dishwasher rule that, telling clients that you did a thing that they were expecting you to do, even if it didn't produce any outcome or activity, like, you still get credit, but you have to claim credit. Like, hey, just want to let you know, we were reviewing your portfolio this month and made no changes and did nothing because we think you're on a great track right where you are. Says almost no advisor ever, because we're like, we're handling it, we're keeping up. And like, if at some point from time to time you don't reach out and remind them that you were doing that, they can forget, because all they see is maybe no activity, at least if you got a more passive style. And so if you don't remind them, like, hey, I'm still looking, I'm still monitoring, just want to let you know, I thoroughly reviewed your portfolio and made the decision to do absolutely nothing because it's on track and in a great place. Conversation matters, not necessarily literally every single month, but to claim that credit for yourself from time to time, because otherwise you get no credit when there's no activity.
I think it turns out that being in a position to tell somebody that there's nothing to do is a lot of hard work.
Yeah.
Right. That's the irony of it. So I think, so number one, finding ways to tell people. Number two, you talked about maybe it's just not a good fit. That's true. Like, and I was going to go the same place you went, which is, let's not be too quick to go there. Like, I think first let's own this and say, what is it about what I did that generated this result. Like what, even on that 1%, figure out what it is about my actions that contributed to this result. And it could have been like, oh shoot, you're right. Like I've been a little dismissive.
Yeah.
I could see how that would come across as I think it's unimportant, so therefore I must not be good at it. Right. So get that cleared up. But I want to spend the bulk of the time on number 3, which is like, how do we have this conversation when it happens? So my favorite phrase for this, and I was even like at the point where if there was still a chance of stopping an ACAT, stopping a transfer, I was having this conversation.
Okay.
And the conversation was always,
because I sucked at this. I just went to
Yeah,
the war. It's the other investment pitch. So
And I think
I'm here for personal therapy, but everybody else can listen in as well. So
to me, I think you're right to point out, like, it's almost never, performance is never the thing. There's always a thing behind the thing, right? Like I heard about it, I felt embarrassed. My brother-in-law, Disneyland, like there are a million things, but performance is the way it's manifesting, and that's reasonable. And by the way, just one more plug for like us accepting responsibility. We, as not us as a profession, but us as an industry that we belong to, we created this problem. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's really funny that we're all like, they're so silly, those people behaving that way. We're the ones that built this. Like, now I know you didn't build the Financial Pornography Network, but nobody was born thinking they needed a quarterly performance report. We taught them that they needed it. And so now we can't dissolve ourselves of any responsibility. So I think just realizing like, hey, performance coming up is completely reasonable. And by the way, it's also very important as a long-term driver of success. So the way my favorite phrase at these conversations, I wrote it down on the card just so I wouldn't forget, is professional courtesy. This is I loved saying this. Like, hey, Dr.
professional
Terry,
courtesy. Okay.
hey, Dr. Terry, I got this ACAT transfer paperwork, and look, I want you to know I'm going to make this as smooth a process as possible for you. Like, it's no problem. But before we do,
But okay, I was gonna say there's a but coming, right? Okay.
Or and is before we do, but this is probably a but. But before we do, like, look, I'm going to make this as smooth as possible. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure a new advisor has everything they need. It's not a problem. High fives when we see each other. Everything's fine. There's no problems here. But I have to tell you, I'm a bit confused, because this doesn't match the conversations we've been having. And so I'm wondering, out of just could I request a professional courtesy? Or out of professional courtesy,
okay,
could we have one more conversation in person before this goes through? Would you mind if we just sit on this paperwork until we can have a conversation? Like, I'm totally flexible. I'll come up tomorrow.
Okay.
Just talk through, because I'm
So that's
I'm
your angle, like the professional courtesy of allowing me one more conversation, ideally in person, if that's your thing in your model.
Yeah.
Before this goes through.
Yeah, and so this would be the same thing if you got a hint, like, I'm unhappy, I'm actually hiring you. I just want to give you a heads up, you're going to see transfer paperwork. You get hit with that email, it's the same conversation to me. Is like, hey, thanks for giving me the heads up. That means a lot to me, and I'm going to make this as smooth as possible. My thing I care most about is you and your success. So if that means you're better somewhere else, we will make that happen. And I have to admit, I'm a little confused here, because this doesn't match. This doesn't match with everything I heard. So and this is the next thing I think is really important. Own responsibility of this confusion. So I would say, I must have misunderstood something along the way. I must have missed something. And I remember we talked about this in some episode forever ago, which was, anytime there's an objection, rather than pulling out your overcoming objection skills, pull out your listening skills. Like, if I hear an objection, I don't say, how do I overcome it? I say, in my head, I have a warning light that flashes when I hear an objection, and the warning light says, you missed something, brother. And so I would say, like, this just I'm confused. It doesn't match with what I thought I had heard. And so I must have misunderstood something along the way. In fact, Michael, I'm pretty sure I probably missed something. So could we just spend 60 minutes? My goal is not to talk you out of leaving. My goal is to understand where you are and what you want to accomplish. Just make sure I heard it right. And we might get to the point where, like, I miss something, we fix it, and you decide to stay, we might get to the point where it's the best thing for you to move. And if it is, high fives, and I'm going to help you along the way. Like, would that be okay? And then in that meeting, I would go right back to statement of financial purpose, goals. Like, here's what I thought I heard. You want to have freedom and flexibility and time so that you can think about having a family, Julie, because you're so busy right now. You're in your ER job. And Steve, you really want to slow down at work so that you can golf a little bit more and support Julie in her goals. Did I get any of that wrong? No, that's right. Okay, so goals, what does that look like for you to be able to slow down to think about having a family? Well, okay, so I have written down, you have to have a conversation with your partners. You'd want to be on track with retirement. Like, we just reviewed those goals. Is there anything there that I got wrong and missed? Because anything there? Okay, in order to make that happen, what makes that happen is the investment process.
Yep.
Right, like there's a couple things that make it happen. We're saving this much. We're doing this, we're doing these things. And we wanted the portfolio to match those goals and values. And as far as I have it, the portfolio does match the goals and values. Did I not explain that well? Like, do you feel like the portfolio matches the goals and values? We have no idea. We just wanted exposure to Asia. Oh, my fault. Right? Like, I should have told you this world, this, index fund here that we have ex-US is got 30% exposure to, like, I didn't realize that you cared at that level. And believe me, I'm excited when clients care at this level, because this is my favorite part of this is one of my favorite parts of the job. And I think I can go toe to toe with anybody. And that's why I was confused. And then it's like, now we've got permission, I think, to compare the proposed portfolio by somebody else. And you don't even know the exact portfolio, but this proposed solution. And I think the walking them through the alignment, the portfolio is aligned, your use of capital, real financial planning, aligning your use of capital with what's important to you. Once we've demonstrated we understand what's important to you, I think at that point, it's very, very rare that any of your quote unquote competitors have, and they'll be like, wait, John doesn't know any of that. Like, he didn't ever, like, we didn't even mention to John that we want to. And then at that point, I'm like, look, if you think that's best, but is there anything here? Like, I could see a tweak. I missed something here. I could tweak that or that. Or, I'm going to be honest with you, Steve and Julie. If you were to come to me as a new client, knowing what I know now, and even after this conversation, I wouldn't do anything different than what we're doing right now. And if you feel the same, I'm totally fine with just, pretending like this never happened, and I'll disregard the transfer paperwork, and you can tell them that you're going to stay. But if you feel differently, I totally get that this wouldn't be a good fit, because I can't think of anything I'd do differently right now, other than probably maybe, share a little bit. I would be hesitant. I'm really hesitant to use the word educate you, right?
Right.
I'm hesitant to use that word.
That's a little belittling. You're leaving because you're uneducated.
For sure. I would be more along the lines like, I probably wouldn't do, Steve and Julie, knowing what I know now, even after this conversation, I wouldn't do anything different here, except maybe be a little bit better with my communication. And for that, I apologize. I should have been a little better. In fact, we've implemented some things you may have noticed, or in fact, this is going to cause us to look at this really in detail to make sure we're on top of the investment stuff. Because to be honest, Steve and Julie, like, we can go toe to toe with anybody. Like, it's just, we think that is table stakes, because this stuff matters so much. Sometimes that can come across as if we don't care. And for that, I apologize, and we'll do a better job. Like, that's how I would handle that conversation.
Interesting. All right.
Interesting.
I'm just processing and learning. Like, yeah, okay, that would have been helpful at certain points in the past. Okay.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's it's one of my favorite conversations, because I grew up in the investment side of the business.
Yeah.
And I really felt like that was always my goal, like to be really, really good at that stuff. And then it's really interesting to get to a spot where and for years I ran into this problem when I discovered that it mattered deeply, but it mattered not at all if we don't get the other stuff right. I came across as dismissive.
Right.
And I think that's where my experience with Dr. Terry probably came from, was during that dismissive phase. Like, well, you don't even care. Like, that means, but that's the opposite. So it's an and. It's like, it's super important And it doesn't matter at all if we don't get the other stuff right.
Right.
It's capturing the and that tension there, I think, is really, really beautiful. So that, I mean, that's hard-earned experience just because I lost clients and hair based on learning it, you know.
So as you think about it going forward, just I'm curious about this before we wrap up. So as you reflect on this now, like, does this mean like, no, we really do need to keep sending the quarterly performance reports angle, like, because we have to keep putting that in front of them? Or is this more about, no, we just need to send them the periodic email that says, I'm thinking about you and I was actually looking at your portfolio and like, we didn't do anything, but I was looking, and like claiming credit that way? Or is it just making sure we always do hold 5 minutes at the end of every client meeting, but it's on the agenda, like just investment check-in, so I can acknowledge we've been doing stuff, even the stuff we've been doing is looking and doing nothing, because I want to put that conversation there? Like, how would you when it's not the client who's you're saving Dr. Terry, it's like, how would you have managed Dr. Terry knowing what you know now to have fended that off? Like, where would you have put some of that investment conversation or commentary or statements or other stuff into the process?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And the other thing that's important to realize is, like, I've heard the old saying, like, don't scar on the first cut. You know, like Dr. Terry was an outlier.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, most of my clients, we used to tell them, you're going through the financial pornography detox program, and in about 6 to 18 months, you're going to realize most of the stuff you actually think is important isn't really. Like, and when we get there, that'll be awesome. And so I can hear advisors saying, like, I never get calls like that. And you're probably right. But, you know, every once in a while they come up and they're pretty dramatic and they feel like a thing. And so I would just keep doing whatever you're doing and just realize that if there's a chance that you're coming across, I just think the important part of this conversation, like, hopefully we've given you a tool for the conversation when it does happen. Dr. Terry comes, there's some tools there. That's great. But to me, the more important part is just be careful to not come across as so enlightened that you're dismissive about an incredibly important driver. Like, it's actually important. Forget what the Financial Pornography Network is saying. Investment performance is actually important for many of our clients to reach their goals. And I'm not talking about 10%. I'm talking about 5% or 4%. Like, investment performance is a driver, you know, along with savings and your goals and how long you live and all those levers that we can pull. So I think the important piece here is not necessarily like, is it wrong to send a quarterly performance report? No, not at all. Like, maybe you don't need to. I stopped sending one. I just changed my, whatever that form is, the ADP form, and said, investment performance reports available on demand, like anytime you want one. And nobody cared that we changed that, which was a shock to me. I was so surprised. I thought it was key pillar of my value. Nobody cared. So, but if you send one, it's no problem, right? Do you save a little bit of time? I would make sure in every meeting, you know, like whatever we call it, like looking forward meeting, future meeting, performance reporting meeting, like review meeting, that there's some piece on like, hey, by the way, do you have any questions about this? And I would use stronger language there. Like, we really care about this. We know what we're doing.
Okay.
Do you have any questions? Would you like to spend 4 hours and we'll review it in depth? You know, that last one's a little facetious. And then the last bit would just be like, yeah, if you can find, you know, this idea of making sure people know that being in a position to tell them that there's nothing to do is actually hard work. So if you can find ways to systematically drop that in, like, so that they know, like, we looked at this. We looked at this, we're on it. And that to me could just be a systematic monthly email. It could be, you know, a quarterly thing that you send out that, like, hey, by the way, we're on this. And I do still feel like I don't know if it's the last item on the agenda or the first. I don't really know that it matters. I just know that let's not be accidentally dismissive about something that is not only important, they're being told it's important by everybody else.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Carl.
Cheers, Michael. Super fun.
Likewise. Thank you.